Hi everyone, back again. Now we're going to be looking at question 1B. Now this second part of this question at 16 marks is concerned with corporate chargeable gains and how we go working about a gain from a disposal. Now indexation I know was the area that most people were asking to do more revision over, so we will be able to look at this more in class as well, but this is a question which I think is probably one of the most difficult bits of this exam, but that's for you to decide, not me. So in this scenario, somebody has bought 2 lots of shares back in the early 80s, 1 lot of shares in the early 2000s, and sold some in 2018. So before we go into calculating this, we need just a little bit of background. So indexation is the process by which we take inflation out of a price rise. If you buy a house for 100,000 and you sell it in 20 years' time for 300,000, yes, you have made 200,000, but a lot of that is to do with inflation in that 100,000 is not worth the same as it was 20 years ago. So RPI has decided to take that out of it. When you make the disposal, it says not just what did that cost when I bought it, but what is that price inflated to today. So it is just the profit rather than the inflation that I'm looking at. So every time we buy something new, we must take the price as it was when we bought it. We must look at how much inflation, which is the RPI, the retail price index, has shifted. Look how much of that has gone up, move that original price up by the same amount, and that tells us what its equivalent cost is today. We then use proceeds minus today's equivalent cost rather than historical cost. Sounds a lot more complicated than it looks. It can even look quite complicated when you calculate it because there's a few numbers involved, but it is a very simple process and you just need to understand what it is doing. So RPI indexation allowance started in April 1985. So any transactions which took place before that date were not indexed. However, what you had to do was in April 1985, you had to take those purchases and bring them up to April 1985. That understanding is important to see why we do the first step of this question. So we need our column, and as well as having the piece of information we're going to write, we need 3 separate columns that we can work in, and they are called shares, cost, and indexed cost. So how many shares did we buy? What did they actually cost us? What are we going to increase that rate and flight to? So the first thing we do, on the 1st of July 1983, we bought 7,000 shares. They cost us 8,000. We do not have to lift that value up at all because 8,000 when it was bought is the same value. So the indexed cost on that day is 8,000. We then move forward to the 2nd of August 1984. And we buy a further 2,000 shares for 2,500, and the index cost is 10,500. Then our clock moves forward and we arrive at April 1985. Now, we do not total these up and move the value here to April 1985. At this first indexation stage, we must move every transaction from the day it was born to April 85 to get everything up to date. The way in which we do this is we take the retail price index on the date we are looking at, so April 1985. We then take away from that the retail price index the day we made the purchase. Divide that by that first RPI. That gives us a 3 decimal place figure, times that by the cost, that will uplift it. So in this part, we need to do each line individually. So the first thing we need to do is to take the shares which we bought in July 1983 and uplift their value to April 1985. In any question, all of the RPIs that you need will be given to you. You won't have to know any, there won't be any tables, they will be in the question. So we need the April 1985 indexation is 94.78. And we are now doing the indexation from 1983. If we look in the question, it tells us that that figure is 84.3. So we do 94.78 minus 84.3 divided by 84.3, and that gives us 0.124. And we times that by 8,000, which is the cost up here. And that tells us that the indexation allowance on that first transaction is 992. So what that is telling us is, in July 1983, we paid £8,000 for some shares. By April 1985, the equivalent cost from that price in the way inflation has worked is 8,992. Add them both together. We then do the same process again. So 94.78 indexation from 85 minus the indexation from 84 now in the second transaction is 88.94. Divide that by 88.94 and that will give us 0.066 and we times that by this cost, the 2,500. That gives us 165. That's the indexation allowance on that transaction. Now we can total them. So now we get to April 1985 and we have 9,000 shares that cost us 10,500 but have an index cost of 11657. This process looks more complicated than it is. And all you do is you redo this every time a transaction takes place. So we know what the value of everything that we own on April 1985 is. The next transaction takes place in July 2003. So before we can record that transaction of what we did in July 2003, we must take these values and uplift them to July 2003. And we do that the same way we did this. New RPI minus old RPI divided by old RPI. Whatever that is, times it by cost. So we're told in the question that RPI in July 2003 is 183.3. We know that the old RPI is 94.78 because it's in there. So we do minus 94.78 divided by 94.78, and that gives us 0.934, and we times that by this cost, which we'd already got. So all we're doing is we're taking this cost and we're updating it by finding out how much the RPI has moved. $11657, that's the amount of indexation allowance, which we can now put here, 10888, and now we can total them up. So what this is saying, by the time we reach July 2003, we have 9,000 shares, which cost us 10,500, but those today with the inflation rates would cost 22,545. Now we can record the transaction from July 2003. So in July 2003, we bought 2,000 shares. They cost us 5,400, and the index cost of those is the same. So now we own 11,000 shares that cost us 15,900 and have an index price of 27,945. Just found a mistake in the answer. So what we're going to do is we're going to do it correctly. This is right up to here, but we have one more step. We are now told that we sell shares at the current rate. No, it's fine. It's fine. I'm making things up. So at July 2003, this is our holding. We are now going to sell some shares. We are going to sell 700. Now, that means that we are going to sell $711,000. That's the fraction that we're going to sell. So we can now take those figures and move them forward. So we can bring this up here. And we are going to sell 700, leaving us 10,300. The cost of that 700 is we take this figure and times it by that fraction. So the fraction which we are selling is the fraction of the cost and the fraction of the indexed cost that we will take. And the same with this figure times this fraction. So this is the value of our disposal, and this is the value that we have left afterwards. This is what's called our Section 104 holding after this disposal. This tells us the share's value. What we are actually asked is calculate the cost and index cost of the Section 104 holding on the 8th of July after the disposal. That's this figure. What we need to do is figure out what gain was made, because in part 2 it tells us we have consideration of 4,000. 4,000 is the income. What is the cost? What we cannot do is say this figure, because this figure is not the cost. The cost is this figure. So we do minus cost of 1012, and that gives us 2988. But we are entitled to a new allowance. Indexation allowance. The indexation allowance is the difference between these two figures. So we say 1778 minus 1012 equals 766, and that is what we take off and leave us a gain of 2222. If we were doing the other type of question, this is the figure that would now appear in this calculation that we had here before, where we just put the chargeable gain. Again, I'm wary. I'm trying to look through the camera and see how visible the numbers are. I think they're all okay. However, I am taking close-up photos afterwards, so you can look through them. You also have the answers, so you are able to see where these are coming from. That part of the question has taken 14 minutes. The first part took 15 minutes, so we have completed the whole question in around 30 minutes. Remembering it's a 44-minute per question exam paper. Okay, I'll finish this off, take these off, take photos of them, change the paper over, then we can come back and do question 2.